Alright, hello everyone, it is Nigel here once again, and this is going to be another crime analysis video. So, this one is going to be about the murder of John Lennon. Now, just a couple things before we begin. For starters, I'm going to be also doing a bunch of stuff this week, so stay tuned to the end to find out more about that. But also, my review of John Cena versus CM Punk at Money in the Bank 2011 is out now. It's on my YouTube channel, so go check that out if you haven't already. But also, and the most important thing pertaining to this video, of course, as always, viewers' discretion is advised. You're going to hear some things that may be uncomfortable for you to listen to in here. But without further ado, let's get right into it. So, first you have to ask, who is John Lennon? So, he was born John Winston Lennon on October 9th of 1940 in Liverpool, England, and he was named after his grandfather and Prime Minister Winston Churchill. So his grandfather's name was also John Lennon, and then the middle name, Winston, was from British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who, of course, was the British Prime Minister during World War II, which was obviously going on at this time. So, because of issues between his parents, he was sent to be raised by his aunt Mimi and her husband George. So, Mimi bought John a collection of short stories, and George brought him a mouth organ, aka a musical instrument such as a harmonica, and he also had Lennon solve crossword puzzles. So his mother Julia would visit John often, where she played him Elvis records, taught him piano, and taught him to play Ain't That a Shame by Fats Domino. So he was raised Anglican, and he attended Dovedale Primary School and later Quarry Bank High School. And while Julia was very supportive of her son's musical endeavors, including buying him a Galatone Champion acoustic guitar, his Aunt Mimi was not as supportive, hoping he would grow bored of music and not believing he would be famous because of it, even though he told her that he would be famous. So his mother Julia was unfortunately killed on July 15th of 1958 after being hit by a car, and he took his mother's death, I should say, very hard, as he began drinking heavily and getting into fights. And the memory of his mother served as an inspiration for the Beatles' song Julia. And what happened to his mother began to affect John's behavior as he began to neglect school, and his neglect of school and his change of behavior led to him having a ripped in relationship with his aunt. And although he was accepted into Liverpool College of Art thanks to intervention from both his aunt and the headmaster, as he unfortunately failed high school, failed the exam to get in, he was eventually kicked out of this college during his senior year. So he started a group known as the Quarrymen at the age of 15 in 1956, which was named after his high school, Quarry Bank High School. And on July 6th, I should say, they had a performance in Bolton, which is where Lennon met Paul McCartney, who Lennon asked to join his band. Then McCartney recommended that his friend George Harrison join the band as the lead guitarist, although Lennon at first was hesitant about this because he felt Harrison was too young at 14 years old. Although Harrison joined after auditioning for Lennon and McCartney, so McCartney scheduled a private audition, and I believe on top of one of the London buses for Harrison, and he ended up impressing them, so where he joined the band. So Lennon's friend from art school, Stuart Sutcliffe, which if I mispronounce any of these names, I do apologize. He joined as bassist, and the group became known as the Beatles. So Pete Best then joined the group after they were in need of a drummer, and this was during a 48-night stay in Hamburg, Germany. Lennon's aunt Mimi was horrified about the trip and pleaded Lennon to continue his art studies, which he obviously did not do. But Brian Epstein managed the Beatles from 1962 until his death in 1967 and persuaded the band to dress professionally on stage. And then Sutcliffe left after deciding to stay in Hamburg, and Best ended up being replaced as drummer by Ringo Starr, which formed the Beatles lineup that remained until their breakup in 1970. So the other Beatles idolized Lennon and saw him as their leader, and this is evident with this quote here from Paul McCartney. McCartney, saying, "He was like our own little Elvis. We all looked up to John. He was older and he was very much the leader. He was the quickest wit and the smartest." And then they went on to mainstream success. Of course, they're part of the British invasion, taking over America. There was Beatlemania and stuff, and they released a lot of popular songs such as like "Hey Jude" and "Yellow Submarine," stuff like that. And then the band then ended up breaking up, as I previously mentioned, due to a combination of Lennon's increased drug use, his preoccupation with his new girlfriend and later wife Yoko Ono, and his desire to produce solo work from all four of them. And it was a bit of a harsh breakup, unfortunately. So Lennon did begin doing solo work, which included his song and subsequent album Imagine. He had some strained relationships with his former bandmates, although they did try to make some amends before his death. And he had two children, Julian and Sean. Julian was born to Lennon's previous relationship with Cynthia Powell, and Sean was born to Yoko Ono. And he was known for his political activism, especially with stuff like what happened with the Bloody Sunday in Ireland and everything. And so stuff like that, Lennon was very vocal about, and it reflected in his songs as well. He ended up taking a 5-year hiatus from music in 1975 so he could raise his son Sean, and he did return in 1980, but unfortunately it would not last long. So now we get into the murder, what actually happened. So we start off with learning about Mark David Chapman, who was the murderer of John Lennon. So Mark Chapman was a 25-year-old security guard from Honolulu, Hawaii, who was a fan of the Beatles. However, Chapman did not like John Lennon, claiming that he was offended when John Lennon said that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus during an interview in 1966, where John Lennon said that rock and roll would outshine Christianity at some point. And he also did not like that Lennon did not believe in God, which was reflected in some of his songs, including one of his songs called God. And he also did not like how Lennon was reported to have a lavish lifestyle, even though he, in his song Imagine, said, "Imagine a world with no possessions." And he felt that Lennon was a phony because of this. So on October 27th, Chapman purchased a 38mm caliber Charter Arms revolver in Honolulu and fled to New York on October 29th after inquiring about the best way to transport a revolver. So, not wanting ammunition to get damaged on the flight because he was advised that that might happen, he chose instead to head to New York without ammunition. So he left New York in November, or they debate whether it was the 11th or the 13th where he left, but he then went back to New York by December 6th. So during the day of December 8th, Chapman waited for Lennon outside the Dakota, which was Lennon and Ono's apartment building. He spoke with several fans and the doorman throughout the day. Although he missed Lennon going into the apartment, he did meet Lennon's son Sean and Lennon's family nanny Helen Seaman, where he shook the little boy's hand. And then later, as he saw John Lennon leaving, he asked for an autograph of the copy of Lennon's new CD, along with Ono, their new album, I should say, Double Fantasy. So Lennon and Ono returned to their apartment at 10:50 p.m. after being at the recording plant for several hours. The recording plant is a recording studio. And as they passed Chapman, and with Lennon recognizing Chapman from earlier in the day, Chapman pulled out his revolver and shot at Lennon's back 5 times. Now, although one of the bullets did miss and strike a window of the Dakota, 2 bullets entered the left side of Lennon's back, traveling through the left side of his chest and his left lung, with one exiting his body and one being lodged in his neck. The other 2 bullets went through Lennon's left shoulder. So Lennon, now bleeding profusely, staggered up 5 stairs to the security area to declare that he had been shot before collapsing to the ground. So Jose Perdomo, again, if I mispronounce any of these names, I do apologize, who was the doorman, shook the gun from Chapman's hand and kicked it across the pavement. And concierge worker Jay Hastings, who was also a doorman, summoned the police. Chapman calmly waited on 72nd Street for the police arrived, and once they did, he was reading a paperback copy of the book Catcher in the Rye. So, Officers Stephen Spiro and Peter Cullen arrived 2 minutes later at the scene after receiving reports of gunfire, and they arrested and handcuffed Chapman. And Officers Herb Frauenberger, again, apologize if I mispronounced names, and Tony Palma arrived at the scene and found Lennon, followed by Officers James Moran and Bill Gamble, with Frauenberger putting Lennon in the back of the car, concluding that Lennon's condition was too serious to wait for an ambulance. And Moran and Gamble drove Lennon to the hospital, and on the way they were asking him if he was John Lennon, or they asked him if he knows who he is, to see if he can get see how bad the damage was, and if he can still remember things correctly. He was only able to nod, but was not able to speak, as he was bleeding profusely from his mouth and everything. So, despite attempts to resuscitate him, they definitely tried. They tried very hard to do so. He was pronounced dead on arrival at 11:15 p.m., although some reports say 11:07 p.m. So, the cause of death was ruled as hypovolemic shock as a result of too much blood loss and damage to the left lung. The subclavian artery, which is below the clavicle, and both the aorta and aortic arch. So, according to the report, no person could have lived for more than a few minutes with multiple bullet wounds affecting both the major arteries and veins around the heart, even after proper medical treatment. So, basically, even if they were able to do everything correctly and were able to save John's life, it probably would only be temporary. He would have died a few minutes later anyway. But his death was reported to many news stations, although Ono wanted to make sure her son Sean was informed before the media was informed, as she did not want him to be notified about it by watching it on television. Which, of course, if you remember correctly, a few years ago when Kobe Bryant died in the helicopter crash, TMZ caused a lot of controversy because they were among the first to report the death, which is how Vanessa Bryant, Kobe's widow, found out what happened. So I imagine Yoko Ono didn't want her son to be watching TV and to see his father's death in this very crude and distasteful way. However, reporter Alan J. Weiss of WABC TV happened to be at Roosevelt Memorial Hospital where John Lennon was taken, and he was being treated for a motorcycle accident when Lennon was brought in, and he ended up relaying the information to his news station. So, of course, Lennon's former bandmates were heartbroken by the news of Lennon's passing, with Ringo Starr even flying to New York from the Bahamas to console Yoko Ono. And we have some quotes here from his bandmates. This one is from George Harrison, and it says, "After all we went through together, I had and still have great love and respect for him. I am shocked and stunned. To rob a life is the ultimate robbery in life. The perpetual encroachment, on other people's space is taken to the limit with the use of a gun. It is an outrage that people can take other people's lives when they obviously haven't gotten their own lives in order. I just wanted to be in a band. Here we are 20 years later, and some whack job has shot my mate. I just wanted to play guitar in a band." So actually that was two different quotes. The one where he said he wanted to be in a band was told in private by Harrison. The other one was told to the media when obviously asked for a response. Paul McCartney said, "I can't take it at the moment. John was a great man who will be remembered for his unique contributions to art, music, and peace. He is going to be missed by the whole world." Well, now that was the first quote, but the second quote caused some controversy, where when a reporter asked him for his reaction, and he said, "Drag, isn't it? Okay, cheers, bye-bye." So the second quote was after reporters questioned him, like I said, later on in the day, wanting his reaction at the news, and he said he was being hounded by the reporters and everything. And although he's criticized for this seemingly casual response, he stated that he meant no disrespect to Lennon and simply had trouble articulating his thoughts at the time, given the shock and sadness he felt at Lennon's murder, which honestly is understandable. And this quote from Ringo Starr: "I still well up that some bastard shot him." This was a quote from, I believe, 2010, which was obviously years after the murder happened and everything. So Ono did not have a funeral for Lennon, instead wanting everyone to have a 10 minutes of silence memorial for him around the world, which they did on December 10th. 30,000 people gathered in Lennon's home of Liverpool, and 225,000 people gathered around Naumburg, the Anshel in Central Park, close to where the shooting happened. 3 Beatles fans committed suicide after the murder, which afterwards Yoko told people not to give in to despair over what happened. And Jay Hastings, who was the concierge worker and the doorman, and at the murder as it was taking place, sold his bloodstained shirt from the night of the murder for $42,500 in June of 2016, which that's unfortunate, but that is that, unfortunately. And he tried to help John out. How he was going to try to use a device to stop the blood loss when he saw John Lennon, obviously, but he realized the injuries were too serious, and so that's when he called for the police. So Lennon was cremated at Ferncliff Cemetery in Hartsdale, Westchester County of New York, and his ashes were scattered in Central Park inside of the apartment, and there were several tributes to Lennon afterwards. However, interestingly enough, there were also several conspiracy theories suggesting Chapman was brainwashed by the CIA, or that the doorman Jose Perdomo was a Cuban exile who had ties to the CIA. Hey, how ridiculous. Even with this going on, there's still conspiracy theories about it. So Chapman was brought in and questioned at the 20th Precinct on West 82nd Street for 8 hours before he was brought to New York County Criminal Court on Center Street in Lower Manhattan. He was then sent to Bellevue Hospital for psychiatric evaluation. And on January 2nd, 1981, Chapman was charged with second-degree murder. Excuse me. Although his lawyers advised him to plead insanity, he pled guilty, saying that killing Lennon was the will of God. He was sentenced to 20 years to life with eligibility of parole in 2000, and is incarcerated in Wend Correctional Facility in town of Alden, which surprisingly is east of Buffalo, New York, so pretty much right in my own backyard, which is pretty crazy to think about, and I was definitely shocked to hear that. But we have a quote from Chapman here saying, "I felt that by killing John Lennon, I would become somebody, and instead of that, I became a murderer. And murderers are not somebodies. I am sorry for," this is another quote saying, "I am sorry for being such an idiot and choosing the wrong way for glory." And then he went on to say, "Jesus has forgiven me." So, that is that for this crime. Definitely a heartbreaking tale to see. And one thing that I noted of interest here is that it seemed like this was very premeditated. This didn't seem like something that just happened spur of the moment. Oh, I'm deciding I'm going to kill John Lennon. This was something that was planned, and for sure, or to the point where he found the apartment, Chapman found the apartment where John Lennon was and stayed outside of it and wait to see, okay, is John Lennon actually here? Yes, John Lennon actually is here. And it seemed like by waiting outside during the day of December 8th, it looked like he was going to murder him right then and there, but he missed his chance, but got it later on in the day. And a truly heartbreaking tale that John Lennon was murdered because of a fan who was offended by some of the things that he was saying, and some people go as far as to call Chapman like a crazy fan, someone who definitely wasn't in the right state of mind, and there is evidence to support that, and it looks like that's what's being indicated here. And Yoko Ono has personally sent letters to the incarceration facility that Chapman is in, telling them to keep him in there. And of course, with him being sentenced 20 years to life, he obviously is still there, and it looks like his parole was denied because he's still incarcerated there, even though he would have been granted parole in 2000. But yeah, that is gonna do it for this analysis. Pretty heartbreaking stuff, honestly. If you did find this analysis interesting, please like, comment, share, all that good stuff. Let me know in the comments below how I did, and if there was something I missed from this analysis, please feel free to let me know. Like I said at the beginning of this video, we're going to be doing other stuff this week. I'm going to be reviewing Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, tomorrow. Saturday and Sunday is going to be Tales from Labyrinth and System Shock Radio, respectively. This is going to be our live weeks, and there's actually going to be a change to how I ended up doing those, but we will get to that when we get to that. But without further ado, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you guys later. Peace.